They said Samuel Wade was a dead man walking 12 years alone in those Arizona hills, punishing himself for ghosts he couldn't save. But when that blood-soaked woman stumbled out of the pines begging him not to look, not to touch that filthy cloth hiding her tortured back, he looked anyway. What he saw carved into her flesh made his hands shake for the first time since the war. Some wounds demand witness. Some secrets won't stay buried. And some men find redemption only when they stop running from the very thing that broke them. Stay with me until the end of this story, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Samuel and Ellie's journey travels across this world. The Arizona sun hung like a brass coin in a white-hot sky, beating down on land so dry it had forgotten the taste of mercy. Up where the ponderosa pines gave way to red rock and dust, where civilization was just a memory carried on the wind. Samuel Wade's ranch sat like a monument to solitude, weathered fence posts, a barn that leaned slightly west, and a cabin that hadn't heard a woman's voice in over a decade. Samuel stood on his porch that afternoon, same as he'd stood every afternoon for 12 years, coffee going cold in his tin cup eyes, scanning horizons that never changed. 43 years old and already ancient, with hands that remembered how to kill and a heart that had forgotten how to feel. The war had taken pieces of him. What came after had taken the rest. He was about to turn inside when he saw it, a flash of white moving through the tree line about half a mile up the ridge. Could have been a deer, could have been nothing. But something in the way it moved, stumbling and desperate, made Samuel set down his cup and step off the porch. The figure emerged from the pines like something out of a fever dream. Human female wrapped in what looked like torn curtain fabric, feet bare and bleeding, leaving small crimson prints in the dust. She was maybe 30 yards away when she saw him, and her whole body went rigid with terror. "Please!" Her voice carried across the distance, thin as paper, breaking on the word. "Please don't." Then her legs gave out. Samuel was running before he knew it, his boots kicking up dust clouds as he closed the distance. She'd collapsed face down in the dirt, that white cloth twisted around her like a burial shroud. He dropped to his knees beside her, reaching for her shoulder to turn her over to see if she was breathing. His fingers brushed the cloth. "Don't take it off," she whispered so quiet he almost missed it. Her face was pressed into the earth-dark hair matted with sweat and pine needles. "Please, don't take the cloth off." But he'd already pulled it aside just enough to check for injuries to see what he was dealing with. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat like a fishhook. Her back. Jesus Christ, her back. The skin was a topographical map of cruelty burns and brands, forming symbols he didn't recognize, raised scars that overlapped like some nightmare alphabet. Someone had taken their time, made a ceremony of it. The marks were weeks old, maybe months infected in places where the flesh had tried and failed to heal. Samuel Wade had seen men blown apart by cannon fire. He'd held dying boys while they called for mothers who'd never hear them. He'd walked through field hospitals where the screaming never stopped. But this deliberate, methodical destruction of a human being, this made his hands shake. He realized he was trembling only when he tried to cover her back again and couldn't make his fingers work properly. The cloth slipped from his grip, fell across her shoulders like a whisper. "I'm sorry, hun," she breathed into the dirt. I'm sorry, I'm... Stop." His voice came out rougher than he intended, scraped raw by something he hadn't felt in years. "Stop apologizing." He peeled off his coat, the same brown duster he'd worn through 3 winters, and laid it carefully over her ruined back. "I'm going to pick you up now. I'm taking you inside." "They'll come," she whispered. "Let them." He slid his arms beneath her, one under her shoulders, one under her knees, lifting her the way you'd lift something precious and broken. She weighed nothing, all bone and terror and barely there breath. Her head lolled against his chest, and he could feel her heartbeat against his ribs, frantic as a trapped bird. The walk back to the cabin took less than a minute, but felt like miles. Every step he was aware of her breathing, the small sounds of pain she tried to swallow, the way her fingers clutched weakly at his shirt like she was afraid he'd drop her. He shouldered through the cabin door and carried her straight to his bed, the only bed in the only bedroom where he hadn't slept properly in years anyway. The room smelled like pine and loneliness and old leather. He laid her down on her stomach gentle as he could, arranging pillows so her face wasn't pressed into the mattress. She didn't open her eyes, didn't speak, just lay there like something washed up on a shore, barely alive. Samuel stood there for a moment looking at this broken stranger in his bed, wrapped in his coat, bleeding into his sheets. Something was happening inside his chest, a thawing, a cracking like river ice in spring. For 12 years he'd been frozen solid dead to everything but routine and regret. Now here was this woman, this wounded mystery, and suddenly he was feeling things again, whether he wanted to or not. Purpose. That's what stirred in him. Raw, aching, terrible purpose. He moved to the kitchen area 10 steps in a cabin this small and started building a fire in the stove. The wood was dry, caught quick, and soon the small space began to fill with warmth. He set a pot of water to boil, then rummaged through the cabinet where he kept his medical supplies. They were basic bandages, whiskey for sterilizing needle and thread for stitches. Some herbs that an old Apache woman had taught him to use for infection. Not enough. Not nearly enough for what he'd seen on her back. But it would have to do. While the water heated, he pulled a chair up beside the bed and just sat there, studying her face. She was younger than he'd first thought, late 20s maybe, with features that might have been pretty before whatever hell she'd escaped from had carved away everything soft. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. There was a bruise on her temple, purple, black, and angry. "You got a name?" he asked quietly, not expecting an answer. "Nothing." "I'm Samuel." He continued, his voice low and steady, the way you'd talk to a spooked horse. "Samuel Wade. This is my place. You're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you." Her eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. He tried again. "You need water. When you're ready, I'll help you drink. And then we're going to clean those wounds whether you like it or not. But I won't ask you to talk. I won't ask you for anything you can't give." This time her lips moved, forming words without sound. He leaned closer. "Ellie, Ellie," he repeated, and something about saying her name out loud made her more real, made this whole impossible situation more real. "Okay, Ellie, I've got you." The water reached a boil. Samuel poured it into a basin, added cold water from the pump until it was warm enough to touch, then carried it back to the bedside along with clean rags and his pitiful collection of medical supplies. This was going to hurt. There was no way around it. "Ellie," he said softly, "I need to clean your back. It's infected in places. If we don't treat it, you could die. Do you understand?" A tiny nod. "It's gonna hurt. I'll be as gentle as I can, but it's gonna hurt. If you need to scream, you scream. Nobody's going to judge you for it." He pulled the coat back slowly, exposing her ravaged skin to the firelight. In the better light, the burns looked even worse, deliberate patterns, almost ritualistic. There were numbers too, he realized, a sequence branded between her shoulder blades, 127. They'd numbered her. Like livestock. Rage moved through him, cold and purposeful. Whoever had done this was still out there. And she'd said they would come. Let them come. Samuel dipped the cloth in warm water and began to clean the wounds with a surgeon's precision and a father's tenderness. She stiffened at the first touch, a small sound escaping her lips. Not quite a cry, not quite a moan, something in between that broke his heart. "I know," he murmured. "I know it hurts. Just breathe. Just keep breathing." He worked in silence after that, cleaning each wound, each burn, each branded symbol with meticulous care. The water in the basin turned pink, then red. He changed it twice, 3 times. Some of the infections he drained, trying not to think about the pain he was causing, focusing only on what needed to be done. She cried silently, tears streaming down her face into the pillow. But she didn't scream. Didn't beg him to stop. Just endured it the way she'd probably endured everything else that had been done to her. When it was finally clean, he mixed a poultice from the herbs yarrow for bleeding, plantain for infection, comfrey for the tissue damage. He spread it carefully across her back, then covered everything with clean bandages, wrapping them around her torso and shoulders to keep them in place. "Done," he said quietly, pulling his coat back over her. "The worst is done." She was shaking, fine tremors running through her whole body, shock and pain, and God knew what else. Samuel stood, carried the bloodied water outside to throw it out, then came back and stood by the bed uncertain. She needed rest, needed to feel safe, needed stay, she whispered. He looked down at her. Her eyes were open now, just barely looking at him with something that might have been trust or might have been simple desperation. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. He pulled the chair closer, sat down, and kept his word. Night fell. The cabin grew dark except for the orange glow from the stove. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the hills, their voices rising and falling like lost souls. Samuel sat in that chair and watched Ellie sleep, if you could call it sleep. Mostly it was fitful unconsciousness broken by whimpers and jerking movements, nightmares playing out behind her closed eyes. Around midnight, she started talking in her sleep. "Please, no more. I'll be good. Please. Number 127 reporting. I'll be good." Samuel's jaw tightened. Number 127. That's what they'd called her. Reduced her to digits. She thrashed suddenly, and he stood putting a gentle hand on her shoulder through the coat. "Ellie, you're safe. You're not there anymore." She stilled at his touch, at his voice, sinking back into quieter sleep. He sat back down. The night stretched on. Samuel didn't sleep. Couldn't. He kept thinking about what she'd said when he first found her. They'll come. Who were they? Where had she escaped from? And how long did he have before they showed up at his door? Questions for later. Right now she needed to heal, needed to drink water and eat something and remember what it felt like to be human instead of a number. When dawn started to gray, the windows Ellie stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, and for a moment she looked confused, disoriented. Then she saw Samuel sitting there, and something in her face shifted, not quite relief, but a small lessening of fear. "You stayed," she whispered. "Told you I would. I need—" She swallowed her voice like sandpaper. "Water." Samuel stood immediately, filled a cup from the pitcher, and brought it back. He helped her sit up slightly, supporting her weight, holding the cup to her lips while she drank in small, careful sips. "Not too fast," he cautioned. "Your stomach's probably empty." She nodded, drank a little more, then lay back down with a small sound of exhaustion. The simple act of sitting up had cost her. "When you're ready," Samuel said, "I've got some broth. Nothing heavy. Just something to give you strength." "Thank you," she breathed. He heated up some beef broth he'd made 2 days ago, brought it back in a bowl with a spoon. She managed 3 spoonfuls before shaking her head. "That's good," he said. "That's a start." She looked at him, then really looked at him, her eyes searching his face like she was trying to figure out what kind of man he was, what he wanted from her, what this was going to cost. "You want to know," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Only if you want to tell me. Only when you're ready." "I might never be ready." "Then you never have to tell me." That seemed to surprise her. "You're not going to ask, not going to demand." "No." Silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens when 2 people recognize something in each other, some shared understanding of pain, of survival, of what it means to be broken. Finally, Ellie spoke. "There's a place, north of here, hidden in the mountains, a mining operation that doesn't officially exist. They take people, runaways, drifters, anyone who won't be missed. Work them until they die. And before you ask why someone doesn't report it, the law knows. The law gets paid to look the other way." Samuel felt that cold rage again spreading through his chest like frost. "The marks on your back. They brand everyone. Numbers for the workers, symbols for the ones who try to escape. So everyone knows what happens when you run." Her voice was steady now, matter of fact, like she was talking about the weather. "I was there for 7 months. I ran 3 days ago. I've been hiding in the woods, moving at night, staying off the roads. I don't know how far I came. I don't even know where I am. You're on the Wade Ranch, about 40 miles southwest of Prescott." She closed her eyes. 40 miles, that's all. "You were barefoot, injured, starving. 40 miles is a miracle." "It won't be enough. They'll find me. They always find the ones who run." "How?" "They have trackers, men who know these mountains better than anyone. And they have incentive. They get paid extra for every runaway they bring back. Alive is preferred, but not required." Samuel stood, walked to the window, looked out at the morning light spilling across his land. Somewhere out there, men were tracking this woman. Men who treated humans like property. men who branded them like cattle. "Let them come," he said again, and this time there was iron in his voice. Ellie made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. "You don't understand what you're saying. These aren't ordinary men. They're—" "I fought in the war," Samuel interrupted quietly. "Second Manassas, Antietam, Fredericksburg. I've seen what men are capable of when they stop being human, and I've killed men who needed killing." He turned to look at her. "I'm not scared of whoever's coming. I'm just sorry I can't kill them twice." For the first time since he'd found her, something flickered in Ellie's eyes that might have been hope. Small, fragile, barely there, but hope nonetheless. "Why?" she asked. "Why help me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft, haunted. 12 years ago, there was another girl. Different circumstances, same kind of evil. I was too late to help her. Too late to save her. I've lived with that every day since." He met Ellie's eyes. "I won't be too late this time." The days that followed fell into a strange rhythm. Samuel tended to Ellie's wounds twice daily, changing the bandages, applying fresh poultices, watching for signs of infection. She was stronger than she looked. The wounds began to heal slowly but surely, new skin forming over the worst of the burns. She ate more each day. First just broth, then bread, then small portions of whatever Samuel cooked. He wasn't much of a cook, but he knew how to keep body and soul together. Beans and bacon, cornbread, coffee, strong enough to strip paint. They didn't talk much. Ellie seemed content to sit by the fire wrapped in Samuel's spare blanket, staring into the flames like they held answers to questions she wasn't ready to ask. And Samuel, who'd lived alone for so long that conversation felt foreign, didn't push. But there were moments, small exchanges that felt like bridge building. One morning she asked the girl, the one from 12 years ago. What was her name? Samuel was at the stove frying eggs. He didn't turn around. Rebecca. She was 17. Got caught up with a bad man trying to escape. I was a deputy then in a town about 100 miles east. She came to me for help and I hesitated, followed protocol, went to my superior before taking action. By the time I came back for her, she was dead. It wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? He turned to face her. I chose rules over a human life. I chose procedure over doing what was right, and she died because of it. Ellie was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're not choosing rules now." "No," he agreed. "I'm not." Another day she asked about his ranch. "How long have you lived here?" 12 years. Came here right after Rebecca died. Needed to be somewhere I couldn't hurt anyone by being too slow, too careful. Somewhere I couldn't fail anyone else." "Sounds lonely." "It was. It is." He paused. Or it was anyway. She understood what he wasn't saying, that her presence had changed. Something in this place had brought life back to a space that had been more tomb than home. On the third day, she stood up. Actually stood on her own without help. She was shaky, had to grab the chair for support, but she stayed upright. "Look at you." Samuel said, a hint of something that might have been pride in his voice. "I need to start moving," she said. "Staying in bed will make me weak, and I can't be weak when they come." "If they come." "When," she corrected firmly. "Samuel, you have to understand. They will come. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they will come. And when they do..." She looked at him, her eyes serious. "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If it comes down to a choice between me and your life, you let them take me. You don't die for someone you barely know." Samuel's jaw tightened. "That's not going to happen." "Promise me." "No." They stared at each other, wills clashing. Finally, Ellie looked away first, sinking back into the chair with a small sound of frustration. "You're a stubborn man, Samuel Wade." "So I've been told, but..." On the afternoon of the 5th day, the sound came. Samuel was outside chopping wood for the stove when he heard it hoofbeats, still distant, but approaching. His hand stilled on the axe handle. Inside the cabin, he knew Ellie had heard it too. Through the window, he could see her face go white, see her hands start to shake. He set down the axe and walked calmly to the porch, waiting. The rider appeared over the ridge a few minutes later, a single man on a chestnut horse dressed too fine for these parts. Black vest, white shirt, string tie. City clothes worn by someone playing at being Western. But there was nothing playful about the gun on his hip or the cold calculation in his eyes. He reined up about 20 feet from the porch, looking Samuel over with the kind of assessment you give livestock at auction. "Afternoon," the man said. His voice was smooth, educated. "Wrong for this place." "Afternoon." Samuel replied, his own voice flat, empty of welcome. "Name's Dalton. I'm looking for some lost property. Female dark-haired might be injured. Wondering if you've seen anyone matching that description." Samuel let the silence stretch before answering. "This is private property. You're trespassing." Dalton smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "That's not an answer to my question." "Wasn't meant to be." The smile faded. "Let's be clear about something, friend. The property I'm looking for is valuable. There's a reward for her return $500, no questions asked. That's good money for a simple exchange." "I said you're trespassing." Dalton's hand drifted toward his gun. "And I said, touch that weapon and you'll be dead before it clears leather." Samuel's voice was conversational, almost friendly, which made the threat all the more chilling. "I'm giving you one chance to turn that horse around and ride out of here. Take it." For a long moment, Dalton sat there weighing his options. Samuel could see the calculation happening, this backwoods rancher against a professional gun. How fast was the old man? Was he bluffing? Finally, Dalton's hand moved away from his gun, but when he spoke, his voice carried a promise that made Samuel's blood run cold. "You're making a mistake, a fatal one. Ellie Rose belongs to the Sierra Mining Company, and the Sierra Mining Company always collects what's theirs. This isn't over-rancher, not even close." He wheeled his horse around and rode off back the way he'd come. But before he disappeared over the ridge, he turned one last time, and the look in his eyes was pure malice. Samuel stood on that porch until the hoofbeats faded completely. Then he turned and went inside. Ellie was standing by the window, trembling so hard her teeth chattered. "He'll be back, with others. You've just signed your death warrant." "Maybe." Samuel walked to his gun cabinet, pulled out his Winchester, checked the load. "But if they want you, they're going to have to go through me first." "Samuel." "No." He turned to face her, and something in his expression must have told her that arguing was useless. "I told you already. I was too late once. I won't be too late again. This is where I make my stand, Ellie. This is where I stop running from who I failed to be." Tears started down her face, but she nodded. Outside, the sun began its descent toward the mountains, and somewhere in those mountains, Samuel knew men were gathering, making plans, coming for what they believed they owned. Let them come. For the first time in 12 years, Samuel Wade had something worth fighting for, something worth living for, maybe even something worth dying for. He checked his ammunition, cleaned his guns, and waited for the storm he knew was coming. The cabin settled into tense quiet as evening fell. Samuel lit the lamps, built up the fire, and sat by the window with his rifle across his knees. Ellie sat across from him, watching him with eyes that held fear and gratitude and something else he couldn't quite name. "Tell me about Rebecca," she said quietly. Samuel was silent for so long she probably thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "She had red hair, freckles, laughed like bells. She trusted me to save her, and I let her down. I let procedure and fear and hesitation kill her just as surely as if I'd pulled the trigger myself. I've been dead inside ever since, just going through motions, breathing, but not living. And now," he looked at her, this woman he'd known for less than a week, this broken stranger who'd stumbled into his life and cracked open something he'd thought was sealed forever. "Now I'm alive again, and I'm terrified, because being alive means you can lose things, means you can fail, means you can hurt again." "You won't fail," Ellie said with quiet certainty. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. Because you're here. Because you didn't turn me away. Because you looked at my back and saw a person, not property. That's not the kind of man who fails when it matters." Samuel wanted to believe her. God, how he wanted to believe her. Outside, the night deepened. Stars appeared cold and distant. Somewhere out there tomorrow was coming, and with it violence, blood, maybe death. But tonight in this small cabin, there was warmth. There was hope. There were two people learning that redemption doesn't announce itself with trumpets. Sometimes it just shows up barefoot and bleeding at your door, wrapped in torn cloth, begging you not to look. And sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply choosing to look anyway. Samuel sat by that window all night, keeping watch, keeping faith, keeping the promise he'd made to a ghost 12 years ago and to a living woman now. This time, he wouldn't be too late. This time, he would be enough. Dawn came cold and gray, painting the Arizona hills in shades of steel and shadow. Samuel hadn't moved from his position by the window, his body stiff from hours of vigilance, his mind sharp despite the lack of sleep. Ellie had finally dozed off around 3 a.m, curled in the chair by the fire, her breathing soft but uneven. He'd thrown a blanket over her without waking her, then returned to his watch. The sun crept over the ridge, and with it came the waiting. That terrible elastic tension of knowing violence was coming, but not knowing when. Samuel had felt it before in the war, in those awful minutes before a battle, when you could hear the enemy moving in the woods but couldn't see them yet. When every heartbeat felt like it might be your last. He stood, stretched the kinks from his back, and walked quietly to the stove to start coffee. The familiar ritual of grinding beans and stoking the fire helped settle his nerves. Behind him, Ellie stirred. Anything? Her voice was rough with sleep. Nothing yet. Coffee. Please. He poured 2 cups, handed her one, and returned to the window. The hills were peaceful, deceptively so. A hawk circled lazily overhead. In the distance, a deer picked its way through the scrub brush. Normal. Everything looked so goddamn normal. They won't come in daylight, Ellie said, reading his thoughts. Too exposed. They'll wait for dusk, maybe full dark. Come at us when we can't see them approaching. Then we have all day to prepare. Samuel turned to face her. You know these men. How many will come? She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup, seeking warmth. Dalton won't come alone again. Not after you threaten him. He'll bring at least 2 others, maybe 3. They'll be armed, rifles, pistols, probably a shotgun, and they'll be mean. The company doesn't hire gentlemen. How good are they? Good enough. They're not gunslingers, but they know how to shoot. And they're not afraid to kill. They've done it before. Samuel nodded slowly, processing this. 3 against 1 were poor odds, especially defending a fixed position. The cabin had 2 windows, front and back, and only 1 door. They could be surrounded, easily pinned down, maybe burned out. We need help, he said. From who you said yourself, the law looks the other way. Not all the law. Samuel set down his cup with decision. There's a man in Prescott, Sheriff Abram Cole. We fought together in the war. He's one of the few lawmen in this territory who can't be bought. If I can get word to him, that's 40 miles. You'd never make it there and back before they come. I'm not going. Samuel walked to a small desk in the corner, pulled out paper and pencil, and started writing. There's a ranch about 8 miles south, the Hendersons. Good people. Their son rides to Prescott twice a week with supplies. If I can get this message to them, they can get it to Abram. That's a lot of ifs. It's what we've got. He finished the note, folded it carefully, and tucked it in his shirt pocket. I'll take the back trail, stay off the main road. 2 hours there, 2 hours back. I'll be home by early afternoon. And if they come while you're gone... Samuel walked to the gun cabinet, pulled out a Colt revolver, checked the cylinder, and held it out to her. You know how to use this. Ellie stared at the weapon like it was a snake. I know which end the bullets come out of. That's a start. He moved behind her, guided her hands into proper position around the grip. Thumb the hammer back like this. Aim center mass. Squeeze the trigger, don't pull, and don't hesitate. These men won't. She held the gun awkwardly, but there was determination in her jaw. What if I miss? Then you shoot again and again, until the gun's empty or they're down. He stepped back. Bar the door after I leave. Don't open it for anyone but me. If someone tries to break in, you shoot through the door. Understand? Samuel. Ellie. He took her shoulders gently, careful of her healing back. I need you to be strong for a few hours. Can you do that? She met his eyes, and he saw fear there, but also something harder. Survivor's steel. I've been strong for 7 months in hell. I can be strong for 4 hours in a cabin with a gun. That's my girl. The words slipped out before he could stop them, intimate and presumptuous. But Ellie didn't pull away. If anything, she leaned slightly into his touch. "Come back," she said quietly. "I will. I promise." He grabbed his coat, his rifle, and slipped out the back door. The last thing he saw before leaving was Ellie standing in the middle of the cabin holding that Colt like a lifeline, looking small and fierce and absolutely alone. The ride to the Henderson place was tense. Samuel took the long way, avoiding the main trail, sticking to the tree line where he could see anyone coming. Every shadow looked like an ambush. Every bird taking flight seemed like a warning. But he made it without incident, emerging from the pines to see the Henderson ranch spread out below a larger operation than his, with a good house, a proper barn, and corrals full of horses. Tom Henderson was in the yard mending fence when Samuel rode up. He was a broad man in his 50s with a weathered face and honest eyes. He straightened when he saw Samuel's surprise evident. "Samuel Wade, haven't seen you down this way in months. What brings you?" Samuel dismounted. "Trouble, Tom. The kind that needs Abram Cole." Tom's expression shifted, grew serious. "Your place?" "Yeah. I've got someone there who needs protection. Men are coming for her bad men. I need you to get this to Abram." He handed over the note. "Your boys still ride to Prescott today. Every Tuesday like clockwork. He's saddling up now." Tom looked at the sealed note, then at Samuel. "This the kind of trouble where you need more than just the sheriff." Samuel hesitated. Pride wanted him to say no to handle this himself, but pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. "If you've got men you trust, men who can shoot and aren't afraid of a fight, I won't turn them away." Tom nodded slowly. "I've got 2 ranch hands who fit that description. Good boys, both of them. Seen their share of trouble. I'll send them up to your place by evening." "Tom, I can't ask." "You're not asking, I'm offering." Tom gripped Samuel's shoulder. "We look after our own out here. You're one of us even if you do keep to yourself like a damn hermit. Besides, any man who stands between innocence and evil deserves backup." Samuel felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. He wasn't alone in this. "Thank you. Thank me by staying alive. Now get back to your place. And Samuel," Tom's face was grave, "you be ready. If these men are what you say they are, they won't go down easy." "I know." The ride back was faster, more direct. Samuel pushed his horse hard, eating up the miles, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. He was still 2 miles from home when he heard it, a single gunshot, flat and sharp, carried on the wind. His blood went cold. He kicked his horse into a full gallop, rifle in hand, praying he wasn't too late. Praying Ellie was alive. Praying he hadn't just made the same mistake he'd made with Rebecca, leaving someone vulnerable when they needed him most. The cabin came into view. The door was still closed. No signs of forced entry. But there was a horse tied to his fence, a bay gelding he didn't recognize. And standing on his porch, cool as you please, was a man in a dusty trail coat, hand resting casually on his gun. Samuel reined up hard, the horse skidding in the dirt, rifle already coming up. "Easy there, Wade." The man held up both hands, showing empty palms. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "Then get off my property." "Can't do that. Not until we talk." Samuel studied him, late 30s, lean and hard, with eyes that had seen violence and hadn't looked away. Not one of Dalton's men. Someone else. "Who the hell are you?" "Name's Jack Mercer. I work for the Sierra Mining Company. I'm here to make you an offer." "Not interested." "You haven't heard it yet." "Don't need to. Get off my property." Mercer smiled, but there was no humor in it. "The woman inside Ellie Rose number 127, she's worth a lot of money to my employers. They're willing to pay you $1,000 for her return. No questions, no trouble. You take the money, we take the girl, everyone walks away breathing." "No. That's a lot of money, Wade. More than you'll see in 5 years of ranching. Think about what you could do with it. New stock, better equipment, maybe even a new start somewhere else. All for one woman you don't even know." Samuel's finger moved to the trigger. "I said no." Mercer's expression hardened. "Then you're a fool. We'll take her anyway. We'll just have to go through you first, and we will go through you, Wade. You can't stop what's coming." "Maybe not, but I can sure as hell make you pay for it." They stared at each other across 20 feet of dusty ground, Two men on opposite sides of a line neither would cross. Finally, Mercer shrugged. Your funeral. We'll be back tonight. You, the girl, and anyone stupid enough to stand with you, you'll all be dead by morning. That's not a threat. It's a guarantee. He walked to his horse mounted up with deliberate slowness and rode off at a leisurely pace, the pace of a man who had all the time in the world because he knew he'd already won. Samuel waited until he was out of sight, then dismounted and ran to the door. Ellie, it's me. The bar scraped and the door flew open. Ellie stood there, the Colt still in her hand, her face pale but composed. I heard a shot. Warning shot. I fired it when that man rode up. Wanted you to know. She stepped back to let him in. Who was he? Another one of them. Came to make an offer. Samuel shut and barred the door behind him. I refused. What kind of offer? He told her. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. $1,000 is a lot of money, she said softly. Not enough. Samuel. Not enough, he repeated firmly. Not for all the money in the world. You understand me. You're not a commodity. You're not property. You're a human being, and I'll be damned if I let anyone treat you as anything less. Something broke in her expression, some last wall she'd been holding up. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and before he could react, she'd stepped into his arms, pressing her face against his chest, shaking with silent sobs. He held her carefully, mindful of her back, his arms a shelter against everything that wanted to hurt her. I'm scared, she whispered into his shirt. I know, so am I. What if we don't survive this? Then we go down fighting, together, but we're going to survive Ellie. I promise you that. She pulled back enough to look up at him, her eyes red and searching. How can you be so sure? Because I've got something to live for now, and that makes all the difference. They stayed like that for a moment that stretched and held. Then Ellie stepped back, wiped her eyes, and squared her shoulders. Okay, so what's the plan? We fortify, we prepare, and we wait for help. They spent the next hours turning the cabin into a fortress. Samuel boarded up the back window, leaving just enough gap to shoot through. He moved furniture to create barriers, established firing positions, stockpiled ammunition, and water. Ellie helped where she could, loading weapons, preparing bandages, preparing for war. Around 3 in the afternoon, 2 riders appeared on the southern trail. Samuel's hand went to his rifle, but he relaxed when he recognized Tom Henderson's ranch hands, Jake and Cole. Both young men in their 20s, both sitting their horses with the easy confidence of men who knew their business. He went out to meet them. Mr. Henderson sent us, Jake said. He was the older of the two with a scar across his chin and steady eyes. Said you might need some guns. I appreciate it, but you need to know what you're getting into. Men are coming tonight, professional killers. This isn't going to be a fair fight. Cole grinned. He was younger, maybe 22, with a reckless energy that probably got him in trouble. Good. I hate fair fights. They're boring. This isn't a game. Never said it was. Cole's expression sobered. We know what we're signing up for, Mr. Wade, and we're here anyway. So how about you tell us where to point our guns? Samuel studied them both, saw the determination there, and nodded. All right, come inside. We've got work to do. He introduced them to Ellie, who shook their hands with quiet gratitude. Then they got to planning. They'll come from multiple directions, Samuel explained, sketching a rough map of the property. Try to surround us, pin us down. Our advantage is we're defending a fixed position with good sight lines. Their advantage is numbers and darkness. How many? Jake asked. At least 3, maybe 4. So we're outnumbered. Nothing new there. Cole checked his pistol. What's the play? We make them pay for every inch of ground. We don't give them anything easy, and we hold until the sheriff gets here. The sheriff's coming. Ellie looked at Samuel with surprise. I hope so. Sent word this morning. Abrams a day's ride away, might not get here in time, but if he does, this whole thing ends. And if he doesn't, Jake asked. Samuel's jaw tightened. Then we end it ourselves. They positioned themselves strategically. Samuel at the front window, Jake at the side. Cole watching the back approach, and Ellie in the center with the Colt ready to support wherever the attack came hardest. Then they waited. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in violent reds and golds. beautiful and terrible all at once. The air grew thick with tension, each minute stretching like taffy. Around sunset, Ellie spoke quietly. "Thank you, all of you, for risking your lives for someone you don't even know." "We know enough," Jake said simply. "Besides," Cole added with a ghost of his earlier grin, "can't let the bastards win. Goes against my religion." A laugh bubbled up from Ellie, small, surprised, genuine. It was the first time Samuel had heard her laugh, and the sound was like water in the desert. Then the laughter died. Because across the ridge, 3 riders had appeared, dark silhouettes against the dying light, moving with predatory purpose. "Here we go," Samuel murmured. The riders stopped about 100 yards out, just beyond effective rifle range. They sat their horses in a line, and even at this distance, Samuel could feel the menace radiating from them. Then one of them, Dalton. Samuel recognized, even at this distance, raised his voice. It carried across the stillness like a curse. "Samuel Wade, this is your last chance. Send out the girl, and we'll leave you and your friends in peace. Refuse, and we'll kill every last one of you. You have 1 minute to decide." Samuel stood, walked to the door, and opened it. He stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, facing down the 3 men who'd come to take Ellie back to hell. "Here's my answer," he shouted back. "You want her. You'll have to come through me, and I promise you, some of you won't leave here alive." Silence. Then Dalton's voice, cold and final. "So be it. Your blood is on your own hands." The 3 riders separated, spreading out, beginning to circle. The siege was beginning. Samuel stepped back inside, barred the door, and took his position at the window. His hands were steady. His breathing was calm. And in his chest, where his heart had been frozen for 12 years, something burned hot and fierce. "Remember," he said to the others, "don't shoot until you've got a clear target. Make every bullet count." The sun touched the horizon, shadows lengthened, and somewhere in that growing darkness, 3 men prepared to attack. The first shot came just as night fell, a rifle crack that shattered the window beside Samuel's head, spraying glass across the floor. He dropped, rolled, came up with his Winchester, and fired back at the muzzle flash. A cry of pain, he'd hit something. "East side!" Jake shouted, firing his own rifle. "2 of them!" More gunfire erupted, a staccato rhythm of death. Cole was shooting out the back, cursing steadily. The cabin filled with smoke and noise and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Samuel saw a figure running between cover points and fired missed. The figure disappeared behind the barn. "Damn it! They're trying to flank us!" Cole yelled. "Coming around the back." "Hold your position," Samuel commanded. "Don't let them." An explosion of sound as someone fired a shotgun at the door. The wood splintered but held. Another blast. The bar was bending. "Ellie, get down?" Samuel turned from the window just as the door burst open. A man charged through, not Dalton. Someone else, wild-eyed and screaming, shotgun raised. Ellie fired. Once, twice. The man staggered, looked down at the blood spreading across his chest in disbelief, and fell. She'd killed him. At point-blank range, without hesitation. Samuel met her eyes across the smoke-filled room, saw the shock there, the horror, but also the grim acceptance. She'd done what needed doing. "Good shot," he said simply. No time for more. Gunfire was still hammering the cabin from outside. Jake was bleeding from his shoulder, still shooting. Cole had abandoned the back window and was crouched by the door, reloading. "We can't hold this," Cole shouted. "There's more of them than we thought." He was right. Samuel did a quick count of the muzzle flashes, at least 5 shooters, maybe 6. They'd been fed bad intelligence, or Dalton had called in reinforcements. Either way, they were in serious trouble. Another window shattered. Someone was throwing torches. Samuel could see the arc of flame through the air. One landed on the roof. Fire began to spread, hungry and fast. "The roof's burning!" Jake yelled. They had minutes, maybe less. Soon the cabin would be an inferno, and they'd have to run right into the guns waiting outside. Samuel's mind raced. They needed a miracle. They needed hoofbeats. Lots of them, coming fast from the south. The gunfire outside suddenly shifted, confusion in the pattern. Shouts. The sound of horses screaming. Then a voice Samuel knew, loud and commanding. "This is Sheriff Abram Cole." Throw down your weapons. You're all under arrest. The cavalry had arrived. Samuel risked a look out the shattered window and saw Chaos, Abram, and at least 6 deputies' rifles blazing, scattering Dalton's men like quail. The attackers were caught between the cabin and the lawmen trapped in a crossfire. "Cover Abram," Samuel shouted and opened up with his Winchester, firing methodically at any target he could see. The battle lasted maybe 2 more minutes, but it felt like hours. When it was over, 3 of the attackers were down. 2 were wounded and surrendering, and 1 Dalton was running for the hills on foot, his horse shot out from under him. Abram, tall and imposing even at 50, rode up to the porch, his badge gleaming in the firelight from the burning roof. "Well, Samuel," he drawled, "when you send for help, you sure know how to throw a party." Samuel let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding and actually laughed a sound rusty from disuse. "Abram, you beautiful son of a bitch. Your timing is impeccable." "Always was." Abram dismounted, looked at the burning roof. "Might want to do something about that fire before you lose the whole place." Reality crashed back. Samuel spun. Everyone out now. They scrambled from the cabin, Samuel, Ellie, Jake, Cole, as the fire spread across the roof, consuming Samuel's home with terrifying speed. They stood in the yard watching 12 years of isolation go up in smoke. Abram's deputies were already organizing a bucket line from the well, trying to save what they could. Abram himself stood beside Samuel, arms crossed. "So," he said conversationally, "you want to tell me what the hell this is all about?" Samuel looked at Ellie, who stood wrapped in a blanket someone had given her, soot-streaked and exhausted, but alive. Alive. "I'll tell you everything," Samuel said. "But first there's a mining operation north of here. Illegal. Using slave labor. These men worked for them." Abram's expression darkened. "Slavery in 1887. Call it what you want. Ellie can tell you the details. But Abram," Samuel gripped his old friend's arm, "that operation needs to burn. Needs to burn to the ground, and everyone running it needs to hang. I'll need evidence. Witnesses." "You've got one," Samuel gestured to Ellie, "and she knows where others are buried." Abram looked at Ellie for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. But this is going to get ugly. The kind of operation you're describing doesn't exist without powerful people looking the other way. I don't care how powerful they are. Justice is justice." "Justice." Abram smiled grimly. "You've changed, Samuel. The man I knew 12 years ago was afraid of justice. Too careful. Too hesitant. I was. Not anymore." They stood together, watching the cabin burn, watching the dawn of something new rise from the ashes of the old, and Samuel realized with sudden clarity that this was his redemption, not just saving Ellie, but exposing the evil that had scarred her, tearing it down so it could never hurt anyone else. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. But for the first time in 12 years, Samuel Wade was ready to fight. The fire had finally died down to smoldering embers by the time the sun broke full over the eastern ridge. What remained of Samuel's cabin stood like a skeleton against the morning sky, blackened beams reaching upward like desperate prayers, walls collapsed into ash and memory. 12 years of self-imposed exile reduced to smoke and ruin in a single night. Samuel stood looking at the wreckage, his face unreadable. Abram's deputies had managed to save the barn and some of the outbuildings, but the cabin itself was gone. Everything in it, his few possessions, his sparse furniture, the bed where he'd tended Ellie's wounds, all of it consumed. "I'm sorry," Ellie said quietly beside him. She'd been standing there for the past 10 minutes, just watching him process the loss. "This is my fault. If I hadn't come here, then you'd be dead or worse," Samuel interrupted, his voice rough from smoke and exhaustion. "And I'd still be living in that tomb half dead myself. Maybe the fire did me a favor, burned away the past so something new can grow." She looked at him uncertainly, trying to read whether he meant it or was just putting on a brave face. But there was something in his eyes, not quite peace, but acceptance. Resolution. Abram walked up, wiping soot from his face with a handkerchief. "Well, you can't stay here. At least not until we get this mess cleared and something rebuilt. I've got a spare room at my place in Prescott. You're both welcome to it." "Both?" Samuel raised an eyebrow. You think I'm letting either of you out of my sight? Not until we've dealt with this mining operation and everyone connected to it. Abram's expression was grim. Besides, the lady's going to need protection. Word's going to spread about what happened here. The people running that operation aren't going to take this lying down. Samuel knew he was right. Last night's attack was just the opening salvo. The real war was about to begin. What about the men you captured? He asked. Locked up tight in my jail. The two who survived are singing like canaries trying to cut deals. They've already confirmed everything the lady said, illegal mining operation, forced labor, the whole rotten business. They've given me names too, including the man who runs the whole show. Who? Abram's jaw tightened. Marcus Bellamy. Owns half of Prescott, the bank, the hotel, the mercantile. Sits on the town council. Biggest philanthropist in the county. He spat into the dirt. And apparently he's been running slaves in his mountain mines for the better part of 3 years. Ellie made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Samuel turned to her, saw her face had gone white. You know him? He asked. I've seen him. He came to the camp twice while I was there, walked through inspecting us like we were livestock. She wrapped her arms around herself, trembling. He's the one who ordered my branding, said I had spirit that needed breaking, watched while they did it, drinking whiskey and smiling. Samuel felt rage move through him like a cold wind. Where is this bastard now? In his fancy house in Prescott, sleeping in a feather bed completely untouched by last night's violence. Abram's voice was bitter. And he'll stay that way unless we can build a case strong enough that even his money and influence can't save him. You have witnesses. You have the men you arrested. Hired guns and lackeys. Their testimony alone won't bring down a man like Bellamy. We need more documentation, proof of ownership, financial records. We need to connect him directly to the operation, and we need more victims willing to testify. Ellie's voice was barely a whisper. There are others, still at the camp, still suffering. Samuel looked at her, saw the guilt in her eyes. Survivor's guilt, the weight of knowing she'd escaped while others remained in chains. He'd seen that look before in soldiers who'd lived through battles that killed their friends. It was a special kind of torture. Then we go get them, he said simply. Abram shook his head. It's not that simple. We don't even know exactly where this camp is. And even if we did, we can't just ride in there with guns blazing. We need to do this right legal, or Bellamy's lawyers will tear apart anything we build. Legal? Samuel's voice was flat. These people are being tortured and worked to death, and you want to worry about legal procedure? I want to make sure Bellamy hangs, Abram shot back. And that only happens if we build an airtight case. You know I'm right, Samuel. You used to be a lawman. You know how this works. Samuel did know. That was the problem. He knew exactly how it worked. How justice moved slowly, while people suffered, how the powerful could delay and deflect and buy their way out of consequences. He'd seen it happen before. Hell, he'd been part of it before, back when he'd chosen procedure over action, and Rebecca had died for it. There has to be another way, he said. There is. Ellie's voice was stronger, now determined. I can take you there. I can show you where the camp is, help you map it out. And I know where Bellamy keeps his records. There's an office at the camp, locked, but I've seen him go in and out of it. If we can get those documents— Too dangerous, Samuel interrupted. You barely escaped with your life once. I'm not letting you go back there. It's not your decision to make. She met his eyes, unflinching. Those people are still there because I ran and left them behind. I have to go back. I have to help free them. She's right, Abram said quietly. We need someone who knows the layout, the routines, the weak points. And we need those documents if we're going to connect Bellamy to any of this. Samuel wanted to argue, wanted to forbid it, wanted to lock Ellie away somewhere safe where nothing could hurt her ever again. But he saw the resolve in her face and knew it would be pointless. She'd made her choice. Then I'm going with you, he said. Samuel. Non-negotiable. You go, I go. That's the deal. Ellie studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right. Together? Abram looked between them, something knowing in his expression. Well then, we've got planning to do, but first you both need food, sleep, and clean clothes. My deputies will finish up here and bring the prisoners to Prescott. You two ride with me. They gathered what little could be salvaged from the ruins, Samuel's spare rifle, some ammunition, a few tools, and loaded it onto horses Abram provided. Jake and Cole, both exhausted but unhurt. Beyond minor wounds, were heading back to the Henderson Ranch with stories that would probably grow taller with each telling. "You did good last night," Samuel told them as they prepared to leave. "Damn good. I won't forget it." Jake just nodded, but Cole grinned despite his exhaustion. "Next time you throw a party, Mr. Wade maybe send invitations a bit earlier. Give us time to prepare." "Next time," Samuel said. "There better not be a next time." The ride to Prescott took most of the day. They moved slowly, careful of Ellie's still healing back, stopping frequently to rest. Abram used the time to question her gently about the mining operation. How many guards? How many prisoners? The layout of the buildings, the routines and schedules. She answered in a flat, emotionless voice, reciting facts like she was reading from a ledger, distancing herself from the memories. Samuel listened and felt his anger grow with each detail. The camp held approximately 40 people at any given time, she said. Men and women both, though they were kept separate. Anyone who became too weak to work was taken away. She didn't know where, but they never came back. The guards worked in rotating shifts, 6 men at a time. The mine itself ran 20 hours a day, with prisoners sleeping in 4-hour shifts on the ground in a barracks that was little more than a shed. "How did they get people there?" Abram asked. 40 souls don't just disappear without someone noticing. Drifters mostly, people passing through who wouldn't be missed. Sometimes they'd grab whole families traveling alone on remote roads. They took me from a stagecoach that got robbed, killed the driver, and guard told the other passengers I'd been killed too. As far as anyone knows, I died 6 months ago in a robbery. Ellie's voice cracked slightly. My family probably buried an empty coffin. Samuel reached over and took her hand. She gripped it tight, holding on like she was drowning. They reached Prescott as evening shadows stretched across the town. It was a bustling place bigger than Samuel remembered from his last visit years ago. The main street was lined with false front buildings, saloons, and shops doing brisk business. People moved about in their daily routines, completely unaware that in the mountains north of them, human beings were being worked to death. Abram's house was on the quiet end of town, a modest 2-story with a wide porch and a well-tended garden that spoke of a woman's touch. Samuel knew Abram was a widower. His wife had died of fever 5 years back, but he'd clearly kept up her garden in her memory. "Come on," Abram said, dismounting. "Let's get you both settled. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, will have supper ready, and Ellie shall draw you a bath if you'd like. Help you get cleaned up." The mention of a bath brought tears to Ellie's eyes. "I'd like that very much." Mrs. Chen turned out to be a tiny Chinese woman with kind eyes and efficient hands. She took one look at Ellie and immediately began fussing, leading her upstairs with a stream of words in Cantonese that somehow conveyed comfort despite the language barrier. Samuel and Abram settled in the parlor, each with a glass of whiskey that burned away some of the exhaustion. "She's strong," Abram observed. "Stronger than most men I know. What she's survived." "I know." Samuel stared into his glass. "She shouldn't have to go back there, Abram. We should be able to do this without her." "But we can't. You know we can't. And she knows it too. She's already made peace with it." "Doesn't mean I have to like it." Abram leaned back in his chair, studying Samuel with the shrewd eyes of a man who'd known him for 20 years. "You care about her, more than just duty or protection." It wasn't a question. Samuel didn't bother denying it. "I barely know her. Sometimes that's all it takes. A moment. A choice. A person who walks into your life and changes everything." Abram smiled sadly. "Sarah and I knew each other 3 days before I proposed. Everybody said we were crazy. We had 32 years together before the fever took her. Best 32 years of my life." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "I'm 43 years old, Abram. I've spent 12 years alone punishing myself for failing Rebecca. I don't know how to be anything other than what I am, a broken man living in the wilderness." "Then maybe it's time to learn. Maybe that's what this is all about, not just saving Ellie, but saving yourself too." Before Samuel could respond, footsteps sounded on the stairs. Ellie appeared transformed. Mrs. Chen had found her a clean dress, simple blue calico that fit reasonably well. Her hair was washed and braided. The soot and grime were gone. She looked young, fragile, and heartbreakingly vulnerable. "The bath was—" She struggled for words. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to be clean." "Sit." Abram said gently, gesturing to a chair. Mrs. Chen will bring supper soon, and then we need to plan. They ate at the kitchen table beef stew and fresh bread that tasted like heaven after the past days of violence and chaos. Mrs. Chen served them with quiet efficiency, then disappeared upstairs to prepare the guest rooms. After the meal, Abram spread a map across the table. Show me where the camp is. Ellie studied the map, her finger tracing north from Prescott into the mountains. Here, I think, in this valley. It's hidden in the trees, can't be seen from any main trails. The mine entrance is built into the mountainside. How many ways in and out? Just one road heavily guarded, but there's a footpath on the eastern ridge. That's how I escaped. It's steep, dangerous, but passable if you're desperate enough. Samuel leaned forward, studying the terrain. If we come in through that footpath at night, we could get close without being detected. Scout the place, find where they keep the records. And how do you plan to get into a locked office? Abram asked. Ellie's voice was quiet. I know where they keep the key. The head guard Cutter, he wears it on a chain around his neck. If we can get it from him. You mean kill him? Samuel said bluntly. I mean do whatever's necessary. Abram shook his head. We're lawmen, or at least I am, and Samuel used to be. We don't murder people in their sleep no matter what they've done. We arrest them. We try them. We let justice take its course. Justice. Ellie's laugh was bitter. Where was justice for the past 7 months? Where was justice for the people who died in that mine? Where's justice for the children? Yes, children working in that hellhole. The word children hit Samuel like a physical blow. There are children there. 3 that I knew of. The youngest was maybe 10. They use them for the smallest tunnels, places adults can't fit. Tears streamed down her face now. So don't talk to me about justice and procedure and doing things the right way. The right way failed these people. The right way is why they're still suffering. Silence fell heavy across the kitchen. Abram looked troubled, torn between his oath as a lawman and the brutal truth of Ellie's words. Samuel felt something hardening inside him, the same cold certainty that had settled over him before battles in the war. We do it her way, he said quietly. Abram looked at him sharply. Samuel, we scout the camp. We get the evidence. And if that means Cutter doesn't wake up to face trial, then so be it. These people have been waiting for justice for 3 years, Abram. We're not going to let them wait any longer because we're worried about proper procedure. You're talking about throwing away everything you believe in. No, Samuel said. I'm talking about finally living up to it. I told you I've changed. This is what that looks like. Abram was quiet for a long time, wrestling with himself. Finally, he nodded slowly. All right, we do this, but we do it smart. And we try to take Cutter alive if we can. Agreed. Agreed, Gate, Samuel said, though he suspected when the moment came, Cutter's fate would be decided by split-second choices rather than noble intentions. They planned late into the night, mapping out routes, timing contingencies. They'd need a larger force to actually raid the camp and free the prisoners. Abram would deputize trusted men, maybe bring in federal marshals if he could reach them in time. But first they needed the reconnaissance mission. They needed the evidence. They needed to know exactly what they were dealing with. We go tomorrow night, Abram decided. That gives us a day to prepare, gather supplies, rest. Samuel, you and Ellie will handle the infiltration. I'll position men at the access points ready to move in when you give the signal. What signal? Ellie asked. Abram pulled out 3 flares from a cabinet. These. Light one when you've got the documents and are ready for us to move. We'll come in fast and hard, secure the camp before they know what hit them. Samuel took one of the flares, felt its weight in his hand. Everything depended on this working. If they failed, if they were caught, the prisoners would suffer for it. Bellamy would disappear any evidence, maybe kill everyone who could testify against him. The stakes couldn't be higher. Get some sleep, Abram said, reading the exhaustion in both their faces. Tomorrow's going to be a long day, and tomorrow night, even longer. Mrs. Chen showed them to their rooms, 2 small bedrooms on the 2nd floor, simply furnished, but comfortable. Samuel's had a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the garden. He stood at that window for a long time, staring out at the night, thinking about what was coming. A soft knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. Come in, Ellie entered still wearing the borrowed dress, her feet bare. She looked small in the doorway, uncertain. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there, in the mine, hearing the screams, feeling the brands burning into my skin, smelling the death and despair." Samuel crossed to her, took her hands. They were cold, trembling. "You don't have to do this, Ellie. We can find another way." "There is no other way. You know it. I know it. Those people need me to be strong enough to go back, to face it, to end it." "What if facing it breaks you?" She looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw something he recognized, the same desperate need for redemption that had been eating at him for 12 years. "Then at least I'll break doing something that matters," she whispered. He pulled her into his arms, careful of her back, and just held her. She pressed against him, seeking warmth, seeking comfort, seeking proof that there was still gentleness left in a world that had shown her so much cruelty. "Stay," she breathed against his chest. "Please. I don't want to be alone tonight." He knew what she was asking, not for intimacy, but for presence, for someone to stand between her and the nightmares, for proof that she wasn't alone in this. "I'll stay." They lay together on the narrow bed, fully clothed, her back to his chest, his arm around her waist. He could feel her breathing, gradually slow, feel the tension leave her body as exhaustion finally claimed her. "Samuel," she murmured, already half asleep. "Yeah. Thank you for seeing me, for not looking away." His throat tightened. "Thank you for stumbling into my life and waking me up." She was asleep within minutes, her breathing deep and even. Samuel lay there holding her, staring at the ceiling, making promises to himself and to her and to every soul suffering in that mountain camp. Tomorrow night, they'd go back to hell. But this time they'd bring hell with them. The next day passed in tense preparation. Abram gathered his most trusted deputies, 4 men who'd proven themselves loyal and capable. He briefed them carefully, swearing them to secrecy, making it clear that one wrong word could doom the entire operation. Samuel checked weapons, cleaned his rifle, sharpened his knife. He worked with methodical precision, the familiar rituals of preparation calming his nerves. He'd done this before, gotten ready for battle, faced death with clear eyes. But this felt different, more personal, more important. Ellie spent hours with Abram going over every detail of the camp layout, drawing maps from memory describing guard rotations and prisoner locations. Her voice remained steady, clinical, but Samuel could see the cost in her eyes. Each memory was a wound reopening. In the afternoon, a telegram arrived from the federal marshal's office. Abram read it, his expression darkening. "What is it?" Samuel asked. "Marshal can't send anyone for at least a week. Some trouble with Apache raiders down south. All available men are deployed." Abram crumpled the telegram in his fist. "We're on our own." "We've been on our own from the start," Samuel said. "Nothing's changed." "Everything's changed. Without federal backing, this could go bad fast. If Bellamy's lawyers get involved, if he has judges in his pocket, then we make sure the evidence is so damning that even corrupt judges can't ignore it. We do our job, Abram. The rest will sort itself out." Evening came too quickly. The sun set in streaks of orange and purple, beautiful and indifferent to the violence it was ushering in. Samuel and Ellie prepared in silence, dressing in dark clothes, checking their weapons one final time. Mrs. Chen pressed packages of food into their hands, her eyes worried. She said something in Cantonese that neither of them understood, but the meaning was clear. "Be careful. Come back alive." Abram's deputies were already positioned, spread out in the mountains with orders to wait for the signal. Abram himself would stay close to the camp's main entrance, ready to lead the assault when the flare went up. "You have 3 hours," he told Samuel as they prepared to ride out. 3 hours to get in, find the documents, and signal. If I don't see that flare by midnight, I'm coming in anyway, evidence or not." "We'll get it done," Samuel promised. They rode north as darkness fell, following trails that grew progressively rougher until they were little more than game paths through the trees. Around 10 o'clock, they left the horses tied in a hidden ravine and continued on foot. Ellie led the way, moving with surprising confidence despite the darkness. She knew this terrain had fled through it in desperation. Now she was walking back into her nightmare by choice. They climbed the eastern ridge, a steep scramble that left them both breathing hard. At the top, Ellie stopped, held up a hand. "Down there," she whispered. In the valley. Samuel looked and saw at lights flickering through the trees, the glow of lanterns and torches. The camp. From this distance, it looked almost peaceful, like any other mining operation, but he knew what horrors those lights concealed. They began their descent, moving slowly, testing each step. One loose stone, one snapped branch could alert the guards. The night was silent except for the wind in the pines and the distant sound of pickaxes striking stone. Even this late, the mine was working. It took 30 minutes to reach the valley floor. They crouched in the shadows at the tree line, studying the camp layout. It matched Ellie's description, a main building that served as barracks and guard quarters. A smaller structure that was the office, the mine entrance carved into the mountainside, and several supply sheds scattered around. "There," Ellie breathed, pointing. "That's the office. And there's Cutter." Samuel followed her gaze and saw him, a big man, heavily muscled with a rifle slung over his shoulder. He was making rounds, checking on the guards posted at various points. Even from this distance, there was something brutal about him, a casual cruelty in the way he moved. "We wait for him to come around again," Samuel whispered. "When he passes that shed, we take him, quick and quiet." Ellie nodded, her hand moving to the knife at her belt. Samuel had given it to her before they left, a small blade sharp enough to kill if necessary. He hoped it wouldn't come to that, but hope had no place in what they were about to do. They waited tense and silent as Cutter completed his rounds. 15 minutes passed. 20. Then Cutter appeared again, walking along the perimeter, heading toward the shed that would provide cover. "Now," Samuel breathed. They moved. Samuel moved like a shadow, years of hunting and war training his body to silence. Ellie was right behind him. Her breathing controlled her footsteps, careful on the packed earth. They circled wide, using the darkness and the shed for cover, positioning themselves where Cutter would pass within arm's reach. The big man approached, whistling tunelessly between his teeth, completely unaware. His rifle hung loose on his shoulder, his hands relaxed at his sides. Arrogant, confident, a man who'd never known real threat because he was always the biggest predator in the room. That was about to change. Cutter passed the corner of the shed. Samuel struck. He came from behind, one arm wrapping around Cutter's throat in a chokehold, the other hand clamping over his mouth to silence any cry. Cutter was stronger than Samuel had anticipated, and he thrashed violently, trying to break free his hands, clawing at Samuel's arm. Ellie moved in fast, her knife flashing in the dim light. But she didn't strike to kill. Instead, she pressed the blade against Cutter's throat, just hard enough to draw a thin line of blood. "Stop fighting or I open your throat," she hissed, her voice cold as winter steel. Cutter went still. Samuel could feel the man's heart hammering against his arm, could feel the moment when arrogance gave way to fear. "Good," Samuel whispered in his ear. "Now we're going to have a conversation. You make one sound louder than a whisper, and the lady here is going to paint the ground with your blood. Understand?" A jerky nod. Samuel loosened his grip slightly enough for Cutter to breathe and speak. "The key around your neck. The one to the office. Give it to her, slowly." Cutter's hand moved to his chest, fumbling with the chain. His fingers were shaking now, all his brutal confidence stripped away by the cold edge of Ellie's knife. He pulled the chain over his head and held it out. Ellie took it, and Samuel saw her hand tremble as she touched the key. Such a small thing, but it represented so much. Freedom for the prisoners, justice for the dead, evidence that could bring down an empire of cruelty. "How many guards tonight?" Samuel asked quietly. 6, Cutter rasped. "Same as always." "Where?" 2 at the mine entrance, 1 at the barracks, 1 patrolling the south perimeter, 2 in the guardhouse. "Prisoners?" "Locked in the barracks for the night, about 30 of them now." 30. 10 fewer than Ellie had said. Samuel felt sick thinking about what had happened to those missing 10. "The office," he continued. "What's in there besides records? Files, ledgers. Bellamy's safe combinations in the top desk drawer, written on the back of a photograph. He's too stupid to memorize it." Cutter's voice held bitter contempt for his employer. "You're going to walk us to that office," Samuel said. "Natural and easy. If anyone asks, you're just doing your rounds. Try to warn them. Try to run. Try anything clever, and you die before you take 2 steps. Clear. Clear." They emerged from behind the shed cutter in front Samuel and Ellie close behind with weapons hidden but ready. To any casual observer, they'd look like Cutter was escorting two new workers. It happened often enough that it wouldn't raise immediate alarm. The camp was a study in controlled misery. Even at this late hour, sounds drifted from the mine metal on stone, the creak of pulleys, occasional coughs or groans. The barracks was a long, low building with barred windows. Through them, Samuel could see huddled shapes lying on the floor. People so exhausted they slept despite the thin blankets and hard ground. His jaw tightened. Soon. Very soon now, this nightmare would end. They reached the office without incident. Cutter unlocked the door with hands that still shook, and they pushed him inside. It was a simple room desk, filing cabinets, a safe in the corner, and walls covered with maps and production charts. Everything neat and organized, a bureaucracy of human suffering. "Sit," Samuel commanded, pointing to a chair. "Hands behind your back." While Ellie kept watch at the window, Samuel tied Cutter securely to the chair with rope he'd brought for this purpose. He gagged him with a strip of cloth, making sure it was tight enough to muffle any sound. "If we're not back in 30 minutes, Samuel told him conversationally, "you're going to burn alive in this building. If we are back and you've tried anything, you're going to wish you had burned. Either way, your days of hurting people are over." Fear flooded Cutter's eyes, and Samuel felt a savage satisfaction. Let him taste terror. Let him know what every person he'd brutalized had felt. He turned to the desk, found the photograph in the top drawer, Bellamy, standing beside a mine cart looking prosperous and proud. On the back, written in careful script, 47 to 2315. The safe opened smoothly. Inside were stacks of documents, ledgers, correspondence, contracts. Samuel began pulling them out, scanning quickly. His hands stilled when he found what they were looking for. "Ellie," he said quietly, "look at this." She crossed to him, looked over his shoulder at the ledger he held open. It was a record of acquisitions, people listed by date, acquired physical description, and purchase price. The entries went back 3 years, hundreds of names, each one representing a human being reduced to inventory. "Dear God," Ellie whispered. She flipped pages, her fingers stopping on an entry dated 7 months ago. Female age 28, dark hair acquired from stagecoach robbery, $150. She looked up at Samuel, her eyes bright with tears. "That's me. I was worth $150. "You're worth everything," Samuel said fiercely. "And this," he held up the ledger, "this is going to hang Bellamy and everyone involved." They worked quickly, gathering every document that could serve as evidence. Financial records showing payments to local officials, sheriffs, judges, even a congressman. Correspondence between Bellamy and other mine owners discussing expansion of the operation. Bills of sale for equipment specifically designed for forced labor. A complete paper trail of corruption and evil. "This is enough," Samuel said, stuffing the documents into a leather satchel they'd brought. "More than enough. Time to signal Abram." Ellie was at the window, peering out into the darkness. "Wait, something's wrong." Samuel joined her, following her gaze. The camp seemed quiet normal, but Ellie was right. There was something off. The guard who should be patrolling the south perimeter was nowhere in sight, and there were voices coming from the guardhouse, raised and agitated. "They know something's wrong," Ellie breathed. "Maybe Cutter missed a check-in. Maybe someone saw us." Even as she spoke, the guardhouse door burst open. 4 men emerged, all armed, spreading out with purpose. One headed directly toward the office. "Back door," Samuel hissed. "Now!" They slipped out through the rear entrance just as the front door rattled. Behind them, they heard the guard enter, heard his shout of alarm when he found Cutter tied to the chair. "Go!" Samuel pushed Ellie ahead of him, and they ran. The camp erupted behind them, shouts, gunfire, the clanging of an alarm bell. Guards were pouring out of the barracks, some half-dressed, all armed and angry. Lanterns swung in the darkness, searching. Samuel and Ellie sprinted for the tree-lined bullets, kicking up dirt at their heels. They made it to the cover of the pines as the whole camp mobilized behind them. But they weren't home free. They could hear pursuit crashing through the underbrush, getting closer. "The flare," Ellie gasped as they ran. "We need to signal Abram." Samuel pulled out the flare, struck it against a rock as they moved. It caught with a brilliant red glow, a beacon visible for miles. He held it high as they ran, praying Abram could see it, praying help was coming. but the flare also made them visible to their pursuers. Gunfire intensified closer now. A bullet clipped a tree inches from Samuel's head, showering him with splinters. They reached the base of the eastern ridge and started climbing. It was treacherous in the dark, made worse by the weight of the satchel and the need for speed. Ellie slipped, nearly fell, and Samuel caught her arm, hauling her up. "Keep moving," he urged. "Don't stop." Behind them, the guards were gaining. Samuel could hear their voices, crude and furious, promising terrible things when they caught up. He fired 3 quick shots down the slope, more to slow them than to hit anything. It bought them precious seconds. They were halfway up the ridge when Samuel heard the most beautiful sound in the world, hoofbeats, many of them coming fast from the north. Abram's voice rang out commanding and sure. "This is the law. Throw down your weapons. You're all under arrest." The gunfire from below faltered, confused. The guards were caught between their fleeing quarry above and armed lawmen below. Some chose to run back to camp, others tried to make a stand. Either way, the assault Abram had planned was underway. Samuel and Ellie crested the ridge and paused, looking back. The valley below was chaos, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness. Men running and shouting, the crack of rifles echoing off the mountains. Through it all, Abram and his deputies pushed forward with relentless purpose. "The prisoners," Ellie said urgently. "They're locked in the barracks. If there's fire, if a stray bullet hits the building..." She was right. They had the evidence, but the mission wouldn't be complete until every captive was free. "Come on," Samuel said, and they started back down into the valley, circling wide to avoid the main fight. They reached the barracks from the rear. Through the barred windows, Samuel could see faces pressed against the glass, terrified eyes, reflecting the chaos outside. He tried the door locked, solid iron reinforced. "Stand back," he told Ellie, then aimed his rifle at the lock and fired. Once, twice, 3 times. The lock shattered. He kicked the door open and was immediately overwhelmed by the smell, unwashed bodies, sickness, despair. In the dim light from outside, he could see the men and women in rags, emaciated and hollow-eyed, staring at him like he might be another nightmare. "We're here to free you," he said loudly. "You're safe now. Come on out quickly." They didn't move. They just stared, too broken or too afraid to believe. Then Ellie pushed past him, stepped into that room of horrors, and they saw her. Recognition rippled through the group. Some had known her, others had heard her story, the legend of number 127 who'd escaped. "It's real," a woman whispered. "She came back. She came back for us." "Come on," Ellie said, her voice breaking. "Please, you have to come with us. It's over. You're free." That word free seemed to finally penetrate. One person moved, then another, then suddenly they were all stumbling toward the door, supporting each other, some crying, some laughing, some still in shocked silence. Samuel stood at the door, helping them out, pointing them toward the tree line. "Go north," he told each one, "away from the fighting. There are horses in a ravine about a mile up. Wait there. Help is coming." A man grabbed Samuel's arm, his grip weak but desperate. "The children," he rasped. "They keep them separate. In the mine. Please." Ice flooded Samuel's veins. "Show me." The man pointed with a trembling hand. "Section C. Down the left tunnel, about 300 feet. There's a room carved out. They lock them in at night." Ellie heard this exchange, her face going white. "I didn't know. God help me, I didn't know they kept them in the mine itself." "You couldn't have known," Samuel said, "but we know now." He looked at her and she read the decision in his eyes. "I'm coming with you," she said. "Ellie, I'm coming. Those children have been in hell. They shouldn't wake up to strange men. They need to see a woman's face, hear a woman's voice. They need to know they're safe." She was right, and there was no time to argue. Samuel turned to the freed prisoners still streaming out. "Go, all of you, get to safety." Then he and Ellie ran for the mine entrance. The fighting had mostly moved to the center of camp now, Abram's men pressing the guards back, overwhelming them with superior numbers and righteous fury. But 2 guards still stood at the mine entrance, uncertain whether to join the fight or hold their position. Samuel didn't give them time to decide. He came out of the darkness with his rifle raised. "Down on the ground now." One guard dropped immediately. The other went for his gun. Samuel shot him not to kill but to wound the bullet, taking him in the shoulder and spinning him around. He fell cursing and bleeding. Samuel and Ellie rushed past them into the mine. The main tunnel was lit by lanterns hung at intervals, casting dancing shadows on the rough walls. The air was thick and hard to breathe, tasting of rock dust and explosive residue. Somewhere deeper in, they could hear the sound of water dripping, of timber creaking under the weight of the mountain above. "Left tunnel," Samuel said, remembering the man's directions. 300 feet. They found it a side passage narrower than the main shaft that descended at a steep angle. Samuel grabbed a lantern from the wall and led the way, Ellie close behind. The sounds of the battle above faded, replaced by the oppressive silence of the earth. 300 feet felt like miles. The tunnel twisted, narrowed, opened into small chambers that showed evidence of recent mining. They were deep now, deep enough that Samuel's ears popped with the pressure. Then they heard a sound that stopped them both cold. Crying. Soft, hopeless, the sound of children who'd learned that crying brought no comfort. "There," Ellie whispered, pointing to a crude wooden door set into the rock wall. It was locked with a heavy padlock. Samuel didn't waste time trying to pick it. He positioned himself, aimed carefully to avoid ricochets in the confined space, and shot the lock off. The door swung open, and the lantern light fell on a sight that would haunt Samuel for the rest of his days. 3 children huddled in a space no bigger than a closet, carved directly from the rock. 2 boys and a girl, ranging from maybe 8 to 12 years old, filthy and skeletal, chained to iron rings set in the wall. They squinted in the sudden light, raising stick-thin arms to shield their eyes. "Oh, God," Ellie breathed, then dropped to her knees. "It's okay, babies, it's okay. We're here to help you. We're going to get you out." The girl, maybe 10 years old, just stared with eyes too old for her face. "Are you real?" she asked, in a voice like dried leaves. "I'm real," Ellie said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so real, and I'm so sorry it took us so long to find you." Samuel was already working on the chains, using the butt of his rifle to break the links where they were weakest. They were old, rusty, probably designed more for psychological restraint than actual security. They broke after several blows. One by one, the children were freed. They couldn't walk too weak, too long confined. Samuel scooped up the youngest boy, who weighed almost nothing, while Ellie took the girl. The older boy, showing a courage that broke Samuel's heart, said he could manage if they just helped him stand. "Hold on to me," Samuel told him. "We're getting out of here. All of us. Together." They made their way back through the tunnel, moving as quickly as they dared with their fragile cargo. The children didn't speak, didn't cry, just clung with desperate strength to their rescuers. When they emerged from the mine, the battle was over. Guards were being lined up in chains, hands bound, while Abram's deputies stood watch. The freed prisoners were being tended to by men who'd brought water and blankets. And Abram stood in the center of it all, directing the operation with calm authority. He saw Samuel and Ellie emerge with the children, and his expression shifted, rage and sorrow warring on his weathered face. "Dear God in heaven," he said quietly, then turned to one of his men. "Get the doctor from Prescott, now. Ride like hell itself is chasing you." The deputy took off at a gallop. Abram approached Samuel and Ellie, looking at the children with barely contained fury. "How bad is it in there?" 3 children in the mine," Samuel said. "We got them all." But Abram, he shifted the boy in his arms, met his friend's eyes. "This operation, it's worse than we thought. These children, they're not even in the ledgers. No record of them. They're ghosts." "Not anymore," Abram said grimly. "Now they're witnesses. Now they're evidence. Now they're going to put nails in Bellamy's coffin." He turned to Ellie. "You did it. You got the documents." She nodded, unable to speak, still holding the little girl who'd buried her face in Ellie's shoulder. "Then it's over. The camp is ours. The prisoners are free. And justice." Abram's voice hardened like iron. "Justice is finally coming." They carried the children to where the other freed prisoners were gathered. Someone had started a fire, and the warmth drew everyone close. Food appeared simple things, bread and cheese and water, but to people who'd been starved, it was a feast. Samuel sat with the boy he'd carried, making sure he drank water slowly, didn't eat too fast. The child ate mechanically, his eyes distant, processing a reality too big to comprehend. free. After months or maybe years in darkness, he was free. Ellie was nearby with the girl who'd finally spoken her name, Sarah. She was telling Sarah about the sky, about stars, about all the beautiful things waiting in the world above. The girl listened with desperate hunger, drinking in hope the way she drank water. Around them, the other freed prisoners were doing the same, learning to be human again piece by painful piece. Some were reuniting with others they'd been separated from. Some sat alone, too traumatized for company. All of them bore the marks of their captivity scars, brands the hollow eyes of people who'd seen too much darkness. But they were alive, and they were free. Abram came over, crouched beside Samuel. The guards are talking, trying to save their own skins. They've confirmed everything in the ledgers and more. Bellamy's going to hang Samuel, him and everyone who helped him. I'm writing to arrest him at first light. Want to come? Samuel looked at the boy beside him, at Ellie, with little Sarah, at all the broken people they'd saved. No, my place is here, making sure these people get the care they need. You don't need me to arrest one man. Fair enough. Abram stood, then paused. You know what you did tonight, don't you? You didn't just save these people. You saved yourself, too. I can see it in your eyes. You're not that haunted man anymore. You're alive again. Samuel thought about that. Abram was right. The ghost of Rebecca that had haunted him for 12 years was finally quiet, finally at peace. Not because he'd forgotten her or stopped caring, but because he'd learned the lesson. Her death had tried to teach him that hesitation costs lives, that sometimes the right thing means breaking rules, that redemption comes not from perfect choices, but from choosing to act when action matters. Yeah, he said quietly. I guess I am. The night wore on. More deputies arrived bringing medical supplies and food. A doctor came from Prescott, a gruff man who took one look at the freed prisoners and started barking orders, setting up a triage area, working with furious precision. Samuel found himself standing at the edge of the camp as dawn approached, watching the sky lighten in the east. Ellie came to stand beside him, and they stood together in comfortable silence. What happens now? She asked finally. Now we heal. All of us. These people, you me. We take the time we need to put ourselves back together. And then he looked at her, this woman who'd stumbled into his life and changed everything. Then we figure out what comes next. Together, if you want. She took his hand, laced her fingers through his. I want. The sun broke over the mountains, spilling gold across the valley. What had been a place of suffering was now a place of liberation. The mine stood empty, its cruel machinery silent. The barracks that had held prisoners now held only shadows. And in the growing light, 33 freed souls, 30 adults and 3 children stood or sat or lay recovering, living proof that evil could be defeated. It wasn't a perfect victory. The trauma these people carried wouldn't fade quickly. Some might never fully recover. But they were alive and they were free, and that was something. That was everything. Samuel felt Ellie squeeze his hand, and he squeezed back. They'd walk through fire together, face their demons, and come out the other side. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be trials, testimony, the slow grinding wheels of justice. There would be nightmares and setbacks and moments of doubt, but they'd face it together. 2 broken people learning to be whole again, helping others do the same. In the distance, Samuel heard horses, Abram and his men, riding out to arrest Bellamy and bring him to justice. The beginning of the end for the Sierra Mining Company and everyone connected to it, a new beginning for everyone else. Come on, Samuel said gently to Ellie. Let's get these people home. And hand in hand, as the sun rose on a new day, they walked back into the camp to do just that. The journey back to Prescott took 3 days instead of 1. The freed prisoners couldn't move quickly. Some had to be carried on makeshift stretchers. Others supported between 2 people, all of them requiring frequent stops to rest. Samuel and Ellie walked among them like shepherds tending a wounded flock, offering water, speaking words of encouragement, simply being present in the overwhelming reality of freedom. On the 2nd day, a woman named Martha, number 89 in the ledgers, though Samuel refused to think of her that way, finally spoke more than a few words. She'd been there the longest of all the survivors, nearly 3 full years, and her eyes held depths of suffering that made even looking at her painful. I had a daughter. she told Ellie as they rested in the shade of a cottonwood. Before they took me. She was 6. She'd be 9 now if she still... Martha's voice broke. Do you think she remembers me? Ellie took the woman's scarred hands in her own. She remembers. Mothers don't get forgotten, Martha. Not by their children. Not ever. How can you be sure? Because I remember mine, and she's been gone 10 years. Ellie's voice was soft but certain. The people we love, they leave marks on our hearts that nothing can erase. Your daughter carries you with her even if she doesn't know you're alive. And soon, her voice grew stronger. Soon you'll be able to show her you are. Hope flickered in Martha's eyes, fragile as candlelight but growing. It was the first time Samuel had seen anything but emptiness there. The children were another matter entirely. Young Sarah wouldn't leave Ellie's side clinging to her skirt like a shadow. The 2 boys, Thomas and James, stayed close to Samuel, following his every move with watchful eyes. They barely spoke, these children who'd had language beaten out of them, who'd learned that words brought punishment and silence brought survival. On the evening of the second day, as they made camp in a meadow still warm from the sun, Samuel sat with Thomas, the oldest, at maybe 12, trying to coax him to eat more than a few bites. You need your strength, Samuel said gently. I know it's hard. I know your stomach's not used to food, but you have to try. Thomas stared at the bread in his hands like he'd forgotten what it was for. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, why, what? Why get strong? Why try? The boy's eyes met Samuel's, and they were ancient, far too old. They'll just catch us again, put us back in the dark. It's what always happens. Samuel's throat tightened. He wanted to promise it would never happen, wanted to swear on everything he held sacred that this boy would never know that darkness again. But Thomas had been betrayed by too many promises already. He needed truth, not platitudes. You're right, Samuel said, and the boy's eyes widened slightly. I can't promise you'll never be hurt again. I can't promise the world is safe or fair or kind. But here's what I can promise. I will spend every remaining day of my life making sure you have the chance to find out what you're meant to be. Not a number. Not a piece of property. A person. Thomas. A boy who gets to grow into a man, who gets to choose his own path, who gets to be free. Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he took a small bite of bread. Then another. It wasn't much, but it was something. Samuel looked across the camp and found Ellie watching him, little Sarah asleep in her lap. Their eyes met across the firelight, and something passed between them. Recognition, understanding the shared weight of responsibility for these broken souls they were trying to help mend. They reached Prescott on the afternoon of the third day to find the town in an uproar. Word had spread about the raid, about the freed prisoners, about Marcus Bellamy's arrest. People lined the streets as they entered, some cheering, some weeping, some just staring in horrified silence at the skeletal figures limping into town. Abram was waiting at his office, and the look on his face told Samuel everything. He's in custody. Bellamy Cutter, all the guards we arrested, every official we could prove took bribes. The circuit judge arrived this morning, a federal man, incorruptible, thank God. Trials start next week. How's Bellamy taking it? Samuel asked. Abram's smile was grim. He's still trying to buy his way out, offering money, making threats, calling in favors. But his ledgers tell a story even his lawyers can't rewrite. And when the jury sees these people, he gestured to the freed prisoners being helped toward the church where the townswomen had prepared beds and food. When they hear their testimony, not even Satan himself could save him. The church had been transformed into a temporary hospital and shelter. The women of Prescott had risen to the occasion with fierce compassion, setting up cots, preparing soup and bread, organizing medical care. The doctor moved among the patients with quiet efficiency, treating infections, setting broken bones that had healed wrong, documenting injuries for the trial. Ellie helped settle Sarah into a cot, tucking blankets around the girl's thin frame. Sarah's eyes followed her every movement, terrified Ellie might disappear. I'm not leaving, Ellie assured her. I'll be right here, right over there. See in that chair. You sleep now. Will you be here when I wake up? Every time, I promise. That seemed to satisfy the girl. Her eyes drifted closed, and within moments she was asleep, her small hand still clutching the edge of Ellie's sleeve. Samuel came to stand beside Ellie, looking down at the sleeping child. "She trusts you. She has no one else." Ellie's voice was thick with emotion. "The guards told her parents she'd died in the mine. They buried an empty coffin. How do you give a child back to parents who've mourned her? How do you explain where she's been, what she's suffered?" Carefully, honestly, with help. Samuel touched her shoulder gently. "But that's a problem for tomorrow. Tonight she's safe. They're all safe because of you." "Because of us," Ellie corrected, leaning into his touch. "I would have died in those woods if you hadn't found me. Would have been dragged back if you hadn't fought. Would have given up if you hadn't shown me that fighting was possible." They stood together in the quiet chaos of the church, surrounded by people beginning the long journey of healing. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The next days passed in a blur of activity. The townspeople rallied with overwhelming generosity, donating clothes, offering jobs to those who could work, opening homes to those who had nowhere to go. The 3 children were placed temporarily with families who could care for them, while efforts were made to locate their real parents or next of kin. Martha's daughter was found living with an aunt in a town 2 days' ride south. The reunion, when it happened in the church 5 days after the rescue, was something Samuel would never forget. The little girl, not so little anymore at 9, had walked in uncertain, confused by the summons. Then she'd seen her mother, and everything else had ceased to exist. "Mama?" The word was barely a breath. "Emma. Oh God, Emma, my baby girl." They'd collapsed into each other's arms, sobbing, clutching, refusing to let go. Everyone in the church was crying. Hardened cowboys, stern matrons, even Abram wiped his eyes roughly. It was grief and joy and 3 years of loss trying to compress into a single moment of reunion. Samuel found himself standing outside, unable to watch anymore, overwhelmed by the rawness of it. Ellie found him there, took his hand without a word. "That's what we did," she said quietly. "We gave Martha back her daughter. We gave Emma back her mother. Whatever else happens, whatever nightmares still come, they have each other again." "Is it enough so?" Samuel asked. "Can it ever be enough to make up for what was taken? No. But it's something. And sometimes something is all we get." She squeezed his hand. "We save who we can, Samuel. We do what we can, and we live with the knowledge that it's not everything, but it matters. It matters so much." The trials began the following week. The courthouse was packed every day, standing room only as victim after victim took the stand to testify. The prosecutor, a young man named Hayes with fire in his belly and righteousness in his eyes, built his case methodically using the ledgers, the correspondence, the financial records Samuel and Ellie had recovered. But it was the testimony that truly sealed Bellamy's fate. Martha spoke of being taken from a stagecoach, of watching her husband shot dead in front of her, of 3 years in darkness and despair. A man named Joseph told of being grabbed off the street in San Francisco, drugged, and waking up in the mine. Another woman described watching her brother die from infected wounds while guards refused medical care. When it was Ellie's turn, she walked to the stand with her head high, her back straight despite the scars hidden beneath her dress. She told her story simply factually, her voice never wavering. She described the branding, the beatings, the dehumanization. She showed the jury the marks on her back. Number 127 burned into her flesh. Bellamy's lawyer tried to break her on cross-examination, suggested she'd been a willing worker, that the scars were self-inflicted, that she was lying for attention or money. Ellie listened to each accusation with calm patience, then destroyed them one by one with quiet, devastating truth. "You ask if I wanted to be there," she said, looking directly at the jury. "I wanted to live. I wanted to see the sun again. I wanted to remember what it felt like to be human instead of property. So yes, I endured. I survived. But wanting to live through hell is not the same as choosing to be there. And the man who put me there..." She turned to look at Bellamy, and her eyes were steel. He knew exactly what he was doing. He looked me in the eye while they branded me, and he smiled. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. The judge, a stern man with 30 years on the bench, showed no mercy in sentencing. "Marcus Bellamy, you have been found guilty of kidnapping, slavery, murder, and crimes against humanity. The law provides only one sentence for such evil death by hanging. May God have mercy on your soul, for this court has none." Bellamy screamed as they dragged him from the courtroom, still trying to threaten to bribe to wield power he no longer possessed. But his voice faded as the doors closed, and justice, slow and imperfect, but real, had finally arrived. The other defendants received similar sentences: the guards who'd brutalized prisoners, the officials who'd looked the other way, even a banker who'd helped launder Bellamy's profits. The mining operation was seized by the federal government to be sold, with all proceeds going to the victims. Outside the courthouse after the verdict, Samuel found Ellie standing alone staring at the sky. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. "It's over," she said when he approached. "It's really over. The trial is. The healing will take longer." "I know, but Samuel—" She turned to face him, and her smile widened. "For the first time in 7 months, I believe healing is possible. I believe I can be whole again. Because of you. Because you didn't look away." He pulled her into his arms, and they stood there on the courthouse steps while the town celebrated around them. Justice had been served, evil had been punished, and in the wreckage of what had been something new was growing. That evening there was a gathering at the church, a celebration, and a memorial both. The freed prisoners, now officially victims and survivors rather than property, came together to honor those who hadn't made it out. Candles were lit for the dead names spoken aloud so they wouldn't be forgotten. Samuel watched as Martha lit a candle for her husband killed in the robbery that had started her nightmare, as Thomas lit one for a boy named Peter, who died in the mine beside him, as Ellie lit candles for 10 people whose names she knew, whose faces haunted her dreams, who'd suffered and died while she survived. "We remember," Ellie said, her voice carrying through the church. "We remember who they were before that place tried to take their humanity. We remember their courage, their kindness, the ways they held on to hope, even in the deepest darkness. And we promise," her voice broke then steadied, "we promise to live for them to be free, for them to make sure their suffering meant something." "Amen," someone said softly, and the word rippled through the gathering like a prayer. After the memorial, people began to disperse to the new lives they were building. Some were staying in Prescott, others heading home to families they thought they'd never see again. A few like Martha and Emma were starting fresh in new places where the past couldn't follow so easily. Samuel found himself alone with Ellie on the church steps as the last of the attendees departed. The night was clear and cool stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. "What happens to us now?" Ellie asked, echoing the question she'd posed days ago in the mining camp. Samuel had been thinking about this, turning it over in his mind during the long days of the trial. His cabin was gone, burned to ash. His old life, the one defined by solitude and self-punishment, was as dead as the man he'd been before Ellie stumbled into his clearing. "I've been offered a job," he said. "Abram wants me as a deputy. Says the territory needs good men willing to stand against evil, and apparently I qualify." He smiled slightly. "Not sure I agree, but the offer's there. Will you take it?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to rebuild the cabin, go back to the hills, find that peace again. But it would be a different kind of peace now. Not the peace of isolation, but the peace of purpose fulfilled." He looked at her. "What about you? What do you want?" Ellie was quiet for a long moment, her eyes on the distant mountains. "I want to help people like me, like us. Survivors who don't know how to live in the world anymore, who need someone to stand with them while they figure it out. There are more mining camps out there, Samuel, more Marcus Bellamy's, more people suffering in silence." "You want to fight," Samuel said, understanding. "I want to make sure no one else has to be number 127, that no more children sleep chained in mine shafts, that no more mothers are stolen from their daughters." She turned to him and her eyes blazed with purpose. "You taught me that one person standing up can make a difference. I want to be that person for others." Samuel felt something shift in his chest, pride, admiration, and a fierce protectiveness. This woman who'd arrived broken at his door had transformed into someone formidable, someone who could change the world. "Then we fight together," he said. "Abram's job offer includes resources authority, the ability to actually make change. We take it, both of us. We hunt down operations like Bellamy's. We free people. We bring justice." He paused. if that's what you want. What I want, Ellie said slowly, stepping closer to him, is to build a life that matters. With someone who understands what we've been through. Someone who sees me, really sees me, and doesn't look away. She reached up, touched his face gently. I want you, Samuel Wade. However that looks. Whatever that means. He covered her hand with his, turned his head to kiss her palm. I spent 12 years dead because I was too afraid to live. Too afraid to fail again, to hurt again, to lose again. But you taught me that living scared isn't living at all. That sometimes you have to walk through fire to find what's worth having. And what's worth having? This, you, a purpose bigger than my own pain, a future instead of just a past. He pulled her close, mindful always of her healing back, and kissed her forehead. I love you, Ellie Rose. I probably loved you from the moment you begged me not to look, and I looked anyway. She laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard, free and genuine and full of joy. I love you too. My rancher who couldn't leave well enough alone, who saved me by refusing to turn away. They stood there on those church steps, two broken people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and somehow impossibly had healed together. Around them, Prescott settled into evening quiet. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. And between them, something new and precious and worth everything they'd endured to find. The weeks that followed were busy ones. Samuel and Ellie both accepted positions with Abram's office, Samuel as Deputy Ellie, as a specialist in victim assistance and investigation. It was unprecedented, a woman in such a role, but after her testimony and her role in bringing down Bellamy, no one questioned her qualifications. Their first case came within a month, reports of another operation, smaller but no less cruel, operating out of Nevada. They rode out with a team of marshals, used the tactics they'd learned, and freed 17 people. Then another case and another, each one adding to their reputation, to their expertise, to the number of lives saved. But they also made time for healing, for building something beyond their work. Samuel purchased land on the outskirts of Prescott and began building a house, not a cabin this time, but a real home with room to grow. Ellie worked with the church to establish a shelter for survivors, a place where people could recover and learn to live free again. Thomas Young. Thomas from the mine came to stay with them while his parents were located. He was still largely silent, still haunted, but slowly he began to emerge from his shell. The first time Samuel heard him laugh, a real laugh at something silly Ellie had said, it felt like a miracle. "You're good with him," Ellie observed one evening, watching Samuel teach Thomas to fish in the creek behind their half-built house. "I was a boy once. Before the war, before everything. I remember what it felt like to be young and think the world was safe. He deserves to feel that again." "We all do," Ellie said softly. 6 months after the trial, Thomas's parents were found, a couple who'd been told their son died in a factory accident back east. The reunion was tearful and joyous and painful all at once. Thomas clung to Samuel before leaving this boy, who'd barely spoken for months, suddenly finding words. "Thank you," he whispered, "for seeing me, for making me believe I was still a person." "You were always a person, Thomas, always. Don't you forget it." The boy nodded, wiped his eyes, and went to his parents. As Samuel watched them leave, he felt Ellie's hand slip into his. "You gave him back his life," she said. "We gave him back his life," Samuel corrected. All of this, we did it together." Little Sarah, who'd clung to Ellie for weeks, had a harder story. Her parents had died in the years she'd been gone, and no other family could be found. When the officials said she'd have to go to an orphanage, Ellie had made a decision. "She stays with us. We'll adopt her if we have to, foster her if we can't. But she stays." Samuel had agreed without hesitation. Sarah had already lost so much. She deserved stability, love, a home that wouldn't disappear. The adoption was finalized on a cool October morning, exactly 1 year after Ellie had stumbled out of the pines into Samuel's life. They stood before a judge, a different judge, a kind one, and swore to love and protect and raise Sarah as their own. Walking out of that courthouse with their new daughter between them, Samuel felt a completion he'd never expected to know. His family had grown from one haunted man to 3 souls learning to thrive together. That evening, they sat on the porch of their finished house, Samuel, Ellie, and Sarah, watching the sun set over the Arizona hills, the same hills where Samuel had lived in isolation for 12 years, the same wilderness where Ellie had fled in desperation. But it looked different now, bathed in golden light, full of promise rather than punishment. Papa. Sarah said she'd started calling Samuel that a few weeks ago, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. Tell me again about the day you met Mama. It had become her favorite story, this tale of rescue and redemption. Samuel suspected it helped her make sense of her own rescue, gave her a framework for understanding how broken things could be made whole. Well, Samuel began settling into the familiar rhythm of the tale. I was standing on my porch, same as always, when I saw something white moving through the trees. Ellie smiled, listening to him tell their story, adding details here and there. Sarah sat between them, rapt as the story unfolded. The desperate woman, the reluctant rancher, the choice to look instead of turn away. When he reached the part where he'd seen Ellie's scars, Sarah interrupted. And you didn't run away. No, sweetheart, I didn't run away. Why not? It was scary. Samuel looked at Ellie and they shared a moment of perfect understanding. Because sometimes the scariest thing is also the most important thing. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply stay. Sarah seemed to accept this, snuggling closer to Ellie. I'm glad you stayed. Me too, baby, Ellie said, kissing the top of her head. Me too. The sun touched the horizon and the sky exploded in shades of orange and pink and purple. Somewhere in those mountains, other people were suffering, other injustices were happening. There would be more fights ahead, more battles to wage, more lives to save. But tonight, on this porch, there was peace. There was love. There was a family built from broken pieces that somehow fit together perfectly. Samuel reached over Sarah's head and took Ellie's hand. She squeezed back, and in that simple gesture was everything gratitude for the past, hope for the future, and the knowledge that whatever came, they would face it together. Come on, Ellie said eventually as the stars began to appear. Time to get this young lady to bed. Sarah protested sleepily, but didn't put up much fight. They tucked her in together, Samuel reading a story while Ellie sat beside them, her hand on Sarah's small shoulder. When Sarah was asleep, they stepped out onto the porch again, the night air cool and clean. A year ago, Ellie said, I was running for my life. Broken, hopeless, ready to die in those woods if it meant not going back. And now I have everything. A home, a daughter, a purpose. You. She turned to face him fully. You saved my life, Samuel. But more than that, you gave me a reason to want to live it. You did the same for me, Samuel said, pulling her close. I was dead long before you showed up. You brought me back. They stood there wrapped in each other's arms under a sky full of stars. In the distance, a coyote called and its mate answered. The sound was lonely, but also beautiful. A reminder that even in wilderness, even in darkness, connection was possible. Samuel thought about the journey that had brought them here. The pain and the violence, the loss and the fear, but also the courage and the love, the moments of grace that had emerged from suffering. He thought about Rebecca, whose death had haunted him for so long, and realized he could finally forgive himself. Not because he'd saved Ellie, no one could replace the girl he'd failed, but because he'd learned the lesson, had become the man who didn't hesitate when it mattered. What are you thinking? Ellie asked, feeling the tension in his body. That redemption isn't a destination. It's a choice we make every day. To keep trying, keep fighting, keep loving, despite the pain and the fear and the uncertainty. That's very profound for a rancher. He laughed. I have my moments. She pulled back to look at him, and in the starlight her face was luminous. Promise me something. Anything. Promise that we'll keep doing this, keep finding the lost ones, the broken ones, the people who need someone to see them and not look away. Promise we'll be for them what we were for each other. I promise, Samuel said without hesitation. As long as I'm breathing, as long as you're beside me, we'll keep fighting. We'll keep saving who we can. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. She kissed him, then soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling. They went inside their house, their home, where their daughter slept safe and sound. They checked on her one more time, a ritual they'd already established, unable to quite believe she was real. She was theirs. She was safe. then retreated to their own room. As Samuel drifted off to sleep with Ellie beside him, he thought about the title of their story, the one Sarah loved to hear. Please don't take the cloth off. She begged, but the rancher did, and started shaking. It was dramatic, sensational even, but it was also true. He had looked, he had shaken at what he saw, and that moment, that choice to bear witness to suffering instead of turning away, had changed everything. In the morning, there would be work to do, letters to answer, cases to investigate, people to help. The fight against evil was never truly over. But tonight there was rest. Tonight there was peace. Tonight there was love. And in a world that had shown them both such darkness, that light was enough, more than enough. It was everything.